joined on the phone today by Dianne Lake, also known at one time as Dianne Snake Lake. She is author of the new book, Member of the Family, My Story of Charles Manson, Life Inside His Cult, and the Darkness That Ended the Sixties. Dianne, how are you today?
Good morning. I'm doing great.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Well, Dianne, let's talk a bit about your new book, Member of the Family. Of course, everyone out there has probably heard stories of Charles Manson, familiar with that time period, but tell us a bit about your book and what makes it different from all the other ones that have been written over the years.
My book gives a perspective of what it was like to be a 14 through 16-year-old in the counterculture movement. I mean, that's how I even was in a position to meet someone like Charles Manson. My family dropped out, and so my book tells about the emotional, spiritual, taking drugs, how this all happened, within my own family. Commune moved in, met Charlie, felt more at home with Charlie and his girls than I did in the commune my parents were living in, and it just, moved on from there and, took a lot of LSD, which seemed like a good idea at the time, but, in retrospect, probably not. And as a 14-year-old, you think you're an adult, but you're not. Your studies have been made now. Your brain really isn't, mature enough to make adult decisions until you're 21. So I was a long ways from 21. And this was the new movement, the counterculture, drugs, free love. I mean, this was all being, expounded on by Timothy Leary and Allen Ginsberg, and, they were kind of the spearhead of the counterculture movement.
Well, Dianne, I know that it's probably difficult to dig up a past like that and to write it out there for everybody to read. So what is it that made you want to write this book after all this time?
My children were old enough to understand. I had recently lost my husband of 35 years, and so I needed to sort of establish who I was, what I was doing. I no longer, was the wife of my longtime friend. And so I had this epiphany. It was time to write the book. And so step by step, got a life coach, wrote my memories. Then I needed an agent and a collaborator, and all of that just kind of fell into place. And I was also in therapy for grief. So along with the grief, then this all, secret that I'd held on to for a long time came to the surface. I had an awesome collaborator, circled around, big circles. The circles just kept getting tighter and deeper, and, she was able to pull a lot of, depth and memory from me that I hope people are going to really appreciate when they read my book, Member of the Family.
Definitely. And I know that you, as you mentioned, you were very young, so you were kind of shielded from a lot of, the murders and that sort of thing. But I'm sure you must have realized that something was off when you were going through that time.
Yeah, there was a point when things started to escalate, and Charlie really didn't want me there, but I didn't obey him and stay in the desert. So I kind of got caught up in, the whole dune buggy, motorcycle, the energy that Charlie was trying to make money and find a path to the desert and, train us, talk to us about this race war that was coming down that he felt was going to happen from, his youth and all the time that he spent in institutions and in jail. This was the message that he had been getting. And so, through drugs, and then the White Album came out, and he, had some delusions about being Jesus Christ and his last name, Manson. So the whole thing just kind of went off the deep end.
Well, Dianne, you mentioned the White Album, and I've always been fascinated by, Manson's own music. Were you ever involved in recording any of that, or did you know if that took place?
Yes, I was.
It was. It seems like if more people had maybe given his music a chance, maybe things wouldn't have escalated the way they did. Is that fair to say?
I think that's true. I mean, we would have gone on a different, trajectory. But he didn't. I think he wanted to record. He wanted people to hear his message, but he didn't want people to mess with his music. He didn't want, people to rearrange his music and change the way he dressed. And so I don't think that was his primary goal in recording, was to be a rock star.
Well, Dianne, I wanted to ask you, obviously a lot of people still, even to this day, sort of romanticize Charles Manson and that time period. What do you think about that, being someone who is actually in the thick of things?
No, don't romanticize it. I think that whole hippie era, the remnant is tie-dye, flowers in your hair, a lot of the music, which was awesome, but the underside is that it opened the door to a lot of predators. It opened the door to people just losing their mind, not really staying, and even my own parents did a 180. I think it has a lot to do with, the murders. People were afraid of hippies after that. People, the whole hippie movement kind of went underground at that point, because look what LSD can do. I really don't think it was the LSD. It was Charlie and his delusion and his hurts and his upbringing.
Sure.
And drugs. And he was a master manipulator.
Well, again, the book, Member of the Family, is out now, and Dianne Lake with us. And, as you mentioned, it's not something to romanticize, but it's still a fascinating part of our history. And, again, it's all in the book. And, hopefully things go well for you, Dianne, now that everything is out there, and maybe you're officially able to put that all behind you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me.
Okay.
And, again, that was Dianne Lake, former member of the Manson family, and her book, Member of the Family, My Story of Charles Manson, Life Inside His Cult and the Darkness That Ended the 60s, is available now.